Good morning and welcome to Fresno State. I'm Larry Salinas, the Executive Director of Governmental Relations here at the university. And thank you for joining us today here at the beautiful Smith Camp Alumni House, and also to those of you who are watching online via Facebook Live. I encourage you to think about questions you might want to ask our distinguished panel during this event. I would like to take a quick opportunity to thank Linda Vasquez from the Campaign for College Opportunity for coordinating this event. And today's forum, Changing Faces, the Case for Diversity and Inclusivity in Higher Education Leadership. This is the third in a series of forums sponsored by the Campaign for College Opportunity. The campaign is a well-regarded advocacy organization that focuses on higher education public policy issues in California. The organization provides invaluable information on higher education to the state legislature, educators, and policy researchers with issue briefs, analyses, and reports. Today, our panel will be discussing the campaign's most recent report, Left Out. This 70-page report, which is all marked up on my end, provides an in-depth look at gender and racial diversity within the three segments of California's higher education system. It celebrates the achievements of the institutions with respect to equitable representation, but also points out soft spots within the ranks of faculty, academic senates, and the campus leadership levels, and also the system-wide leadership levels. At this time, it is my distinct honor to introduce my boss, Dr. Joseph Castro. Upon being named Fresno State's 8th president in May of 2013, Dr. Castro was bestowed with a few firsts. He was the first person from the Central Valley to become president of Fresno State, a proud son of Hanford, just down the road a bit. He was the first native Californian-born president of Fresno State, and he is the first Latino to be named as president of Fresno State. So as we discuss equity issues this morning, we start with a foundation, a good foundation, with the presence of Dr. Castro. So please give a warm welcome to Fresno State President Dr. Joseph Castro.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Larry. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Welcome, welcome. Happy Friday. We made it to Friday. Well, I want to welcome everybody here to Fresno State today for a very important discussion. And I want to congratulate the Campaign for College Opportunity, and specifically my friend Michelle Siqueiros, for their leadership in bringing greater awareness to the issues around inclusiveness and diversity. And I know that there was the theme of left out. I think today what we're hopefully we'll be talking about is how we're all in making sure that our universities serve our increasingly diverse student bodies as effectively as possible. And I want to just acknowledge right off the bat one of my bosses who's here, Trustee Hugo Morales. Thank you for being here, Hugo. And Hugo himself has been a longtime champion for diversity and inclusivity, and has been such a strong supporter within the CSU in making the progress that we have made to date. I think it's fitting that we have this conversation today at Fresno State for a lot of reasons, but you might have heard a few days ago the trustees announced a new president for Csu Bakersfield, a very talented woman, my current and valued partner and provost, Dr. Lynette Zalesny, who through her appointment has now changed the gender balance within the CSU presidency. So with her appointment, it'll be a majority of women. And I think that's a wonderful thing. And there's a lot to be, I think, proud of in terms of the progress that we've made here on the campus and across the system, and the report certainly highlights some of those things. At the same time, there is a lot of work left to be done, and I'm hopeful today that we talk about that important work and how we're together going to get it done, so that we are not talking about the disparities that we continue to see, whether it's in terms of gender representation or race or ethnic representation in the leadership, in the faculty, and all the staff who serve our talented students. And I would add governing boards to that, which I know that the report talks about those things. The Senates, which I'm glad that you're raising awareness there. I was just in my foundation board meeting yesterday, and another reminder of that's another place where diversity is changing, but there's still more work to do. So in all cases, trying to focus in a comprehensive way so that we better serve our students. And as a proud HSI, Hispanic Serving Institution, and Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander Serving Institution, I think this is an ideal place for our discussion today. I'm pleased now to introduce again my friend Michelle Siqueiros. She started with the Campaign for College Opportunity in 2004 and became president in 2014 and has done a magnificent job there leading the campaign and bringing greater visibility to higher ed issues in general, and specifically these issues around diversity and inclusion. Michelle, please come up and join us. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, President Castro, for bringing out the sunshine, too. It's been very gloomy in all parts of the state, apparently, except for Fresno, so I'm super happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Welcome to everyone joining us on Facebook via live stream. And you're absolutely right, Fresno is the best place to have this presentation. We're really honored to be on your amazing campus. Thank you, Larry. So I'm Michelle Siqueiros, and as Dr. Castro mentioned, I get to head the Campaign for College Opportunity. And for the 14 years of our existence, our mission and focus has always been, how do we increase the number of Californians that are prepared for college, that go to college, and that when they get there, graduate from college? And how do we make sure that happens for all students, regardless of how much money is in their parents' bank account, regardless of whether they're first in their families to go to college, regardless of all the perceived obstacles or real obstacles that many of them may face. And we do that because we certainly are very passionate about students having that opportunity, but also because we know it's the best thing for California. In fact, if it weren't for the fact that we have always valued higher education in our state, we certainly wouldn't be the 6th largest economy in the world. So much of our work focuses on bringing other allies in support of higher education, especially our public community colleges and universities, also challenging those same campuses to do a better job at serving students. And so sometimes we're on the same page and sometimes we're sparring a little bit because we believe that we need to challenge our institutions to do more and do better. And also, and primarily, challenge our policymakers and our leaders in the Capitol, the governor, legislators, to adequately fund and support higher education, and to put policies in place that are really centered around students, not around, what's left in the budget, not around what's good for colleges, but around what's good for students in order for us to produce the workforce we need. So that's our focus. Much of how we bring that attention and education to policymakers and the media and the public is by releasing data and research. And so today we're going to talk about our latest research project. Dr. Abby Gates is here. Gates. Sorry about that. Miss the G there. But Abigail is amazing. She joined our team last year. All the hard questions go to her. I'm here just to put it out there. But we've spent over 2.5 years now looking at a lot of research and data to present to you. And part of why we do research and data is because we think that it's important for us to all be starting with a knowledge of sort of basic facts and not sort of just what we think might be true, or it's important to really look at the data and the information that we have in front of us. And so we felt, for the past several years, many of you are familiar that we've done a State of Higher Education for Latinos report, a State of Higher Education for Blacks, State of Higher Education for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander report. And those reports have always focused on the students. How many of Latinx students are ready for college? How many go? How many complete? And this was our focus shifted to really look at, what do our institutions look like? Why aren't we analyzing them by race and ethnicity and gender? And so we really turned the focus. We will be releasing updated reports on those State of Higher Education datas later this year, but we really wanted to focus on this particular piece. Why does it matter? Many of you might be asking that we even look at this question. And I think these are all incredibly important reasons why you look at what the representation of our college leaders and faculty looks like on our campuses. For those of us that are first generation to go to college, we've experienced this, right? Faculty who are first generation and reflect our experiences can serve as role models. They create welcoming campuses. We know that the research proves that a student's sense of belonging is maybe the single most important factor to whether they complete college. And so when we talk about these issues, they're very much aligned with our mission and focus, which you heard me say at the beginning. It's to make sure more Californians go to college, and that once they get there, they graduate, and that we close the equity gaps that persist amongst our students by race. So those are all the reasons. But of course, for me, as the first in my family to go to college, this is very personal. This is a picture of me when I graduated from college. That is, back before the caps got really decorated, because you all really handle that. That was my attempt. That was my cap. Because in all fairness, I've told this story many times. I always considered myself incredibly lucky. In high school, I had teachers that believed in me, that thought I was very smart and encouraged me to take A through G courses. My mother was incredibly supportive, supported me anytime. I could hardly leave the house when I was a kid, but if I managed to say I wanted to go to the library, guess what? My mom took me to the library. So I was in the library all the time because that was one of the few places she would drop anything for to take me to. But my mom had a 6th grade education. She immigrated from Mexico. She worked as a seamstress. She did minimum wage jobs her entire life. My summer experience wasn't camp. It was oftentimes reading those books I checked out at the library, right next to rolls of fabric at her job, because she obviously couldn't afford childcare either. And so I got to see how hard and long her hours were at work and how little she brought home. But that ethic of getting up every day and working hard and doing the best that she could for her family certainly was part of what was ingrained in me. So it was important, and I felt lucky that UCLA students came to my high school and helped me fill out the FAFSA and actually armed me with arguments that I could give my mom so that she would turn over her tax forms. Because why did I need her tax forms? And it was counselors that encouraged me to apply to these small liberal arts colleges like Pitzer and Claremont that I had never heard of. And I couldn't have told you the difference between a liberal arts college, a UC, a CSU, a community college. I just did what people told me to do. And I got to Pitzer, and at the time, my dream school was UC San Diego. And I'm happy to report that I did get in, probably would not have gotten in today. But I did get into UC San Diego, and the only reason it was my dream school was because I had gone to cheer camp at UC San Diego. And I share all this because it is funny, but it is how first-generation students make all kinds of decisions around where they go. It was the only university I had ever stepped foot on because I went there for cheer camp. And it turned out, though, that even back then, in 1991, it was cheaper for me to go to a small private liberal arts college than UC San Diego, because Pitzer offered me much more financial aid. I got a Pitzer grant, I got a Cal grant, I got subsidized loans, and at the end of the day, the only thing that you look at is what is the cost that's remaining that we have to contribute. And that number was lower than the number for UCSD. So that's how I ended up at Pitzer. I wasn't like, oh, this is the perfect place for me. I want a small environment with 12 professors where I can study abroad. And that is how most of our young people make decisions about their future. And when I got to Pitzer, I went from feeling like I was really smart, everybody was so supportive of my education, to walking into my intro to poli-sci class. You'll all know how passionate I am about politics, that would be my class, sitting there in a room probably about this size, listening to the professor and feeling completely lost. Getting the first assignment, not understanding it. Turning in my first paper and getting it returned with a note that said, "Come see me," which I knew was not a good sign. And I felt like I did not belong. And I looked around and most people did not look like me. And I thought, wow, they really made a mistake letting me in. And I went to those office hours with Professor Sullivan, and Professor Sullivan asked me, hey, what happened with that paper? And I said, well, honestly, I didn't understand the reading. And he's like, oh, that's no big deal. Let's talk about it. And we sat there for 45 minutes to an hour talking about the reading. And he's like, just write the paper again. And if you ever don't understand the reading, just come by. He never once made me feel like the dumb person I felt walking into his office. He never once made me feel like I didn't belong. And that was the best thing he could have done, and I'm sure he didn't even think about it. But had he had a different reaction, I don't think I would have worn that cap and gown. And so that is so critical, right? How everyone is important, whether they're, of your race or gender, to making you feel like you belong on campus. And that's part of why we're so passionate about doing this research. The other thing that, we've all been super proud of, right, is in Hollywood, we've seen these two amazing movies come out over the past year that demonstrate the power of telling our stories in an authentic and respectful way. I like to share the story of Coco because I don't know how many of you were aware that when Disney went into production, they decided that they would copyright Dia de los Muertos. And so when they tried to do that, of course, the Latino community was incredibly offended and mobilized to stop it. And it was sort of seen as this sense of like, how could you try to copyright and commercialize a celebration in Mexican culture that is so special to those of us that are Mexican? And as a result of that uproar, I think a really good lesson came for Disney and hopefully for the rest of Hollywood, which is maybe you should hire Mexicans to advise you on a movie about Mexico. And that's exactly what they did. They went out and they hired cultural advisors, and they had a team of folks advising. They got a director that was Mexican American, and they made the movie better. They obviously didn't name it Dia de los Muertos. They were able to represent a celebration and tell a beautiful story and win an Oscar for it. And if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend you do because it's beautiful. And we also saw that Black Panther, for the first time, represented a Black superhero put on screen, predominantly Black cast, telling a story from a point of strength and asset. And guess what? It's breaking records in terms of making money for Hollywood. And so I think both of these films are good examples, not just in entertainment, about the power of representation and inclusivity in all aspects of our lives, and how that is good business, and it's also the right thing to do. So here I'm just going to share some of the quotes that are included in the long marked up report that Larry has, and it's always lovely to see that. I think Abby and I are really proud to see that folks really do read what we put together. But many of the folks that we talked about why they think representation matters and inclusivity in higher education matters. And so these are just a few of the students and professors that we talked to and what they said. I always like Dr. Harris's quote here from San Diego State, because he really talks about how important it is to see yourselves in your students, and how you're able to see all the richness and that they bring to the table, which really, for those of us in education, know about like sort of this deficit-minded thinking versus asset approach to interacting with anybody, right, in your life. So, with that, I'm going to share some general findings. Now, the report is actually longer than Larry said. It's 150 or so pages, and that doesn't include an appendix that has college by college for every single community college, Cal State and UC. You can go into our report and see what the demographics look like for that particular campus. And because Abby wasn't working hard enough, she helped advise and inform and prepare a tool on our website that actually allows you to do it interactively. So you can go in and, again, search this information there. So this is what California undergraduate students look like in our state. And you'll see the same colors throughout, so you'll pretty soon remember all of them. 43% of undergraduate students in California are Latinx. Folks ask me why I use that term. It's to take the gender off of using Latino or Latina. 16% are Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, the AANHPI acronym you see there. 26% are white. 6% of our undergraduate students are African American. And then there's others, and then unknown, so folks that don't declare race. So that gives you a sense of what our students look like. So the question obviously in our report is, how does that compare to what our faculty and our college leaders look like? So when we look at all of California public higher education, the community college, the Cal State, and the UC, this is what the faculty and senior leadership in our three systems of higher education look like in terms of those positions of leadership. That's the community college. This is the Cal State. And then finally, that is the UC. Today we're going to focus on Cal State demographics, but again, in the report you can dig deeper into the University of California or the community colleges if you'd like. So here we're looking at just undergraduate students, over 387,000. So that you know, we're looking at data in 2016-17. So any of the new appointments and the good news that Dr. Castro shared would not be reflected here, but obviously at some point you've got to put a deadline or else Abby will strike. You've got to stop counting at some point. But this is what student demographics look like. So very similar to sort of the statewide demographics that you saw. 43% of Cal State students are Latinx, 4% African American, 18% Asian American, 25% students are white. So we're going to look at leadership in the Cal State system. So on your left, you will constantly see this pie, which is the student demographics, so that you can have it for comparison, but it's the same one I just showed you. This is what tenured faculty, again, system-wide in the Cal State looks like. This is non-tenured faculty. I love showing this because when we were doing the research and talking to folks, we kept hearing, oh, well, the non-tenured faculty are more diverse. That's where you're gonna find all the diversity. So clearly that's not true. We also wanted to look at academic senates, and folks have asked why. And our answer is like, well, academic senates make important decisions about what happens on a campus. And I hear a lot of head nodding. You know, they get to decide what the curriculum looks like, what admission standards look like, what remedial education looks like. So who they are is important. Across the state, academic senates are one of the least diverse categories. So this is senior leaders, and here we're looking at presidents, their cabinets, again, across the entire system. And now we're going to look at the Cal State system itself. So this is the academic senate statewide. And then you're going to see other, the data that you saw were sort of academic senates when you look at every academic senate at the 23 campuses aggregated. But this is what the academic senate of the Cal State system looks like. This is what the office of the chancellor looks like in terms of their leadership. And this is what the Board of Trustees looks like. So Trustee Morales is one of the 20% in that box. We also analyzed by gender, and in a few weeks, we will be releasing a cross-tab analysis of gender and race. But here we're going to share some of the findings of just gender. So females are the orange side, and if we look across the Cal State University campuses, in terms of senior leadership, it's predominantly male. 56% of our Cal State leaders are male. The academic senate you see, and the non-tenured faculty is predominantly female, 55%. Now, what I didn't share is that 54% of undergrads across higher education, public higher education, are female. So this 55% is actually about right, what it should be if we're looking at equitable representation. In tenured faculty, however, you see that there's, certainly underrepresentation of women amongst tenured faculty. And then student enrollment in the system-wide, it's 54%, but you actually have more women enrolled in the CSU at 56% than men. I'm sure raising a lot of other questions. So this is, if we look again at the system, the Cal State system as a whole, we looked at the Board of Trustees, and this is true at the UC Board of Regents and the Community College Board of Governors too, but in my opinion, completely unacceptable. The fact that you would only have 35% of trustee members who are female. At the Office of the Chancellor, there's only one woman in a position of leadership. So next time you see Chancellor Tim White, you may want to remind him of that. And the Academic Senate, again, statewide, even though you kind of saw some of the opposite on the local campuses, here you see that the statewide academic senate is predominantly male. So we're going to share with you now what is Fresno State's data looks like, which I suspect you're interested in. This is what your student population demographics look like, again, for 2016-17. And if we compare that to tenured faculty here on campus, this is what your diversity looks like. One of the bright spots that I'll mention is around Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander representation in faculty at the Cal State. Actually a bright spot. It's an area where there's more equitable representation. This is what non-tenured faculty look like. So if you just wanted to go back to compare, your non-tenured faculty is practically the same as your tenured faculty. And that's your academic senate. And that's your senior leadership. So looking at Dr. Castro and his leadership team, his cabinet. So if we look at all of our public colleges and universities, here are some interesting statistics. 121 of those colleges have majority white tenured faculty. 126 have majority white non-tenured faculty. To my earlier point, our non-tenured faculty is actually less diverse. And if this is the pool that you're using to hire tenured faculty, you can imagine why I'm concerned about this lack of diversity. 138 of our colleges have majority white academic senates, 95%. And when you look at senior leadership bodies, that's the category where we actually do the best in the state, even though we do pretty poorly, I think, in terms of representation still. There are some really good bright spots, and Dr. Castro mentioned one of them. Again, this is 16-17. This number is now 12. So CSU campuses were led by women. 11 of 23 will now be at 12 of 23. And actually the diversity of your presidents is really good as well. So this is certainly a bright spot. This is also true in the community college system, where almost half of community college presidents are female. So still not quite at equity, but definitely better. Now the UC only had one woman that's a chancellor of the University of California. We do have the president of the UC system who's female, and she's the first in that role. And Eloy, as chancellor of the community college system, is also the first Latinx to occupy that role. So that there are some really good bright spots to celebrate and progress that has been made. I think this is something, and we actually have a whole section in the report, and we talk about it a little bit more later. But one of the things that we wanted to address head on as well is the sense of, well, this is a pipeline problem. How many of us have heard that, right? It's, it's a pipeline issue. We're not graduating enough Latinos or African Americans or Asian Americans. Absolutely not true. Because when you look at just a 4-year period of time that we analyzed, the UC and the CSU are absolutely producing a majority of graduates with master's degrees. It's really exciting just to see that number up there. So next time somebody says there's a pipeline problem, you may want to, and that's just California. There's nothing stopping us from hiring Latinos, African Americans, Asian Americans from any of the 49 other states in the union. So what can you do? I think one thing that you will know about the Campaign for College Opportunity is that we don't just do research because we're interested in analyzing data. We do research because we're interested in improving solutions and making sure that our policymakers are focused on the right challenges. So what can you do? I hope that you will join us in demanding that our governor, our current and our next governor, appoint more diverse leaders into those governing bodies. So the governor is responsible for UC Regents appointments, CSU trustee appointments, Board of Governor appointments, the California Student Aid Commission, and there's really no reason that we should tolerate the underrepresentation of women and people of color in those bodies. So just so you know, there's 4 UC Board Regents openings that this governor is going to fill before he ends his term, and I think we should be loudly communicating that we expect diversity in those appointments. The next governor obviously will shape whether or not we do better on this front as well. And we've been hosting gubernatorial forums. We just had the first one with Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom. And I asked him if he would commit to appointing more women and people of color to these boards, and he said yes. So if he's elected, we expect to hold him accountable to that commitment. We also believe it's important that your institutions be collecting this data and reporting it in a publicly transparent way. We actually had to spend more than 2 years analyzing the data because there is no requirement that any campus report the data of their senior leadership or of their academic senates by race. The only data that campuses are required to report by race and ethnicity is faculty data and student data, and that's insufficient. So we're asking policymakers to require your campuses to do it, but that doesn't mean that you can't already do it yourself without that requirement. But obviously, just collecting the data is insufficient. You have to be prepared to act on it and to talk about why it matters to have folks have uncomfortable conversations about representation and race that people never want to have, because we're obviously not going to solve a problem or hire more diverse representatives if we can't even talk about race in a way that's productive. So a big recommendation and a whole section we dedicate on the report, including a toolkit that we provide in there for campuses to use that was developed by the Center for Urban Education at USC, is around how do you do equity-minded hiring, and really think about how the hiring process is biased against people of color or women, and address that reality. How your recruitment practices are maybe not reaching the communities that they need to reach. And how do you, as an institution that is an HSI, that is an AANHPI institution, how do you grow the pipeline for faculty? I mean, how beautiful to have a college president that was born and raised in the Central Valley. I'm sure you all love that that is true, but why did it take so many years for that to happen? Clearly we can grow our own, and we should be. So we talk a lot about that. So I just want to end with, certainly much more articulate words and leadership than I can possibly express up here, but really about the courage that's required to tackle these issues and how important that is for the future of our state to do. And so I really just particularly love the words of Martin Luther King here, because he really talks about how the courage has to come from a place of love for our fellow man, and not for love of the things that might be rewarded when we don't talk about these difficult issues, right? And how we have to set our own egos aside. So many times when we have this conversation, I sense that folks feel like, oh, if I'm male, or is she talking about me? Or if I'm white, does that mean I'm not invited to the table? And that's not what we mean. I want to stress that Professor Sullivan was a white professor who absolutely saved me from dropping out of college. And that's because he believed in my assets and my talent. But we need folks of all colors that believe in our assets and talents. And it's okay to say that and talk about it in that way. What I feel is absolutely true as we do this research, California likes to pride itself on its appreciation of diversity, and yet we completely tolerate the disparities that I showed you in all of these charts. So we say we care about diversity, we value it, we appreciate it, we'll celebrate Cinco de Mayo next month, we'll have Black History celebrations on campus, and yet we're completely comfortable with not having enough Black faculty, Latinx faculty, Asian American faculty. And that's not okay. So we really need action, not just talk about how diversity matters and is important. You know, and all of this coming in the anniversary, we released the report on the anniversary of the East LA walkouts 50 years ago. You know, these young people walked out of their high schools because they weren't getting the kind of education they knew they deserved. And what I always take away from that is that they did it not for themselves, because it was already too late for them, but they did it for their siblings. They did it for all of us who are the first in our families that got to college. And so we stand on their shoulders, and we certainly owe this generation and the next generation, we owe them more. We owe them to have those uncomfortable conversations and to do more and do it better. So with that, I want to thank you for listening, and I'd like to invite our fellow panelists to the stage, and our moderator in particular, who's going to take the mic from me.
Hi everyone, good morning. Hi, good morning. Very eager to join me on stage. I like it. Hi, my name is Dr. Ignacio Hernandez. I'm an assistant professor here in the Kremen School of Education and Human Development at Fresno State. I teach courses in higher education, administration, and leadership. At this time, I'd like to invite my panelists, Dr. Joseph Castro, president of Fresno State, Maggie White, our California Student Association representative, Dr. Melissa Lee, associate vice president of Enrollment Management here at Fresno State, and Michelle Siqueiros is going to join us as well. Please take a seat in the panel. Wonderful. Thank you, Michelle, for that thoughtful presentation of this important work. Hello again, and everyone, and thank you for being here this morning, for giving us your time here at Fresno State. We welcome you to our campus. Like I said, my name is Ignacio Hernandez. I teach courses in higher education, administration, and leadership. I'm not sure if my healers are watching on Facebook Live. If they're here, I always like to acknowledge my graduate students wherever I go. They're a big part of everything that I do. Without California's public higher education system, and the numerous faculty and staff and support programs who cared for me as a student, I had my own Dr. Sullivan. They were people in the EOP program at Mount Sac and at Long Beach. I would not be here today. I've earned a terminal degree in my field, but as I often tell my students, it's the work in my community college degree that I'm most proud of. That AA from Mount Sac was a catalyst to my transfer over to Long Beach State, and continues to serve as a motivation for my research and my teaching. Through my research and professional commitments, I've had the privilege to build relationships with higher education leaders from all across the United States, and California as well. But teaching here at Fresno State has allowed me to work with graduate students and undergraduates and staff and faculty that are dedicated to imagining a more inclusive and just future in higher education and student affairs. I think the Campaign for College Opportunities recent report, Left Out, provides a data-driven support for what many educators here in California, California's colleges and universities have known to be true for quite some time. Most notably that most of California's higher ed students are people of color, yet the academic leaders are predominantly white. Walk around and you kind of intuit that, you sense that, right? Large majorities of our college faculty, senior leaders, and academic centers are white, right? And women are a majority of our college students, but comprise fewer than half of the executive leadership. And of course, we've been making news with that number tilting over from 11 to 12. And so if Dr. Selesny was here, I'd say congratulations to her. So I'll turn it over to our panelists, and I will give you some questions, and I hope these questions are tough and to stump you a couple of times. No, I hope that you can inform us and certainly regale us with your expert opinions here. I'd like to first just start off by asking if you can take a little bit of time to tell us a little bit about yourself and some of those first reactions that you had to the left out report and the data that was presented. We'll start with you, Dr. Castro.
Great. Well, thank you, Ignacio. Well, as Larry mentioned and Michelle mentioned, I am the lucky 8th president of Fresno State and the first from the San Joaquin Valley, and I look at these issues from that perspective. I also look at them as a first generation to college Latino student who experienced the Berkeley campus and going into those first classes where I was the only Latino in the classroom. And I remember distinctly when the syllabus came out in that freshman year in those courses, and I'd look at the books and I could hear my classmates talking about them that, oh, I've already read these books. And I didn't recognize these books. And part of it was because I came from a high school that had very few AP courses, and I had to make up a lot of ground once I got to Berkeley. And fortunately, I was able to do that. But I remember that as I think about these issues here at Fresno State. And I am very proud of the fact that we have a relatively diverse student body. It does not quite represent the diversity of the San Joaquin Valley, but it is well on its way. With 70% plus first generation to college students, over half of whom are Latino, and diverse students across the board. As I mentioned earlier, we're an AANHPI institution as well. I think back to my hero, the former Chancellor Tomas Rivera. He was the first Latino chancellor, as far as I know, in California of a university. He served from 1979 to 1984, and I've studied him in great depth and tried to model some of the things that he worked on during that 5-year tenure. But I remember him going through his archives. He had lists of people of color, of women, handwritten lists of people that he was trying to recruit, virtually single-handedly. I'm certain that he was the only Latino on his cabinet, and there were very few Latino leaders at the time. Fresno State is a very different place today, thankfully. We have diverse appointments across our senior leadership team and more diverse faculty. The percentage of new faculty that we're hiring includes very high proportions of students of people of color and women, and I'm proud of that, but we have such a great deal of work to do. I've been honored that we have our first woman who's African American to serve as our librarian, for example, Dr. Lee, our first Asian American woman to head up our admissions and enrollment. I could go on and on. I have 3 women vice presidents, 2 of them succeeded men. We have deans who are succeeding, women who succeeded men, people of color who succeeded white predecessors. So that is happening. But we need to be as aggressive as we can, more aggressive, and this report reminds us of that. As I mentioned, I was with my foundation board yesterday. That has been one of the most challenging areas for me as president. That is a great group of human beings who do not yet represent the interests of our students, and yet they play such a key role in the funding of our education. So in terms of the future, I would ask the campaign to include foundation boards because of the importance of non-state funds for our institutions, and particularly around scholarships for our students. And just the feeling I have as president talking about these issues with a group that is still coming around and I'd add other boards as well who are very influential. And I've tried very hard to diversify those boards, but they are extraordinarily influential, and it's a work in progress. So I urge the campaign to continue to place attention on these kinds of issues and hold us accountable. And I look forward to greater progress and cooperation with everyone who cares deeply about these issues.
Thank you, Dr. Castro. Maggie, same question. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're from up the road in Stanislaus, and tell us your initial reactions to the report.
Absolutely, and thank you so much. And first, I just want to point out, Dr. Castro, that you are such a wonderful example of exactly what Michelle was speaking about, of not just having a moral commitment to these issues, but actually taking diversity-related action to improve inclusivity. So I appreciate the example that you're setting here at Fresno State. But my name is Maggie White. I'm a graduate student at Stanislaus State, a San Joaquin Valley native from Modesto. I'm the current president of the Cal State Student Association, representing all of the students of the CSU system from Humboldt to San Diego. So I am so privileged to be included on this panel and to have had the pleasure of reading through this report. And I think that there were definitely bright spots here. I was so pleased to see that for our ONP population, it's just about parallel with our faculty, our tenure and non-tenure faculty. But when you look at these numbers of approximately a quarter of students being white, but over 70% of leadership positions being held by white people, that's appalling. And I think, as our moderator was saying earlier, when you walk across these university campuses, you intuit that. You know that the majority of people in these leadership positions are white. Even if you're not specifically looking for that, you can feel it as you walk across the campus. And I think I knew that, but seeing the numbers so starkly written on paper, it was still jarring to me. And our moderator also mentioned the toughness of the community college, which is where so many CSU students come from. And I'm sure someone on this panel knows exactly what percentage of CSU students come from community college. Unfortunately, I don't, but I know it's a large percentage. And I also came from a community college where I went for 4 years before transferring to a CSU. And I know how important it was for me as a young person who struggled with so many issues, as many young people do, to have faculty who were women who really took me under their wing and took an interest in me in a way that felt so nourishing that I wanted to go to class every day, even as I worked full-time and struggled with so many issues. And that's what made me want to graduate and transfer and go on now to a master's degree, which is something that I never expected. But one thing that I do want to point out is that so many of my teachers were also white. And that was something that I never noticed because I had no reason to notice it. They looked like me. And it really wasn't until I got involved in this work and met so many people who had different experiences that I thought, have you had the same teachers I've had? Because they don't look like you. They look a lot more like me. So even though the majority, or at least half of my teachers were women, the huge majority of them were always white. And that didn't bother me because I had no concept that other people were not getting what they needed from seeing themselves reflected in the classroom and in administration. And so I feel so privileged to now have that understanding and to be growing in myself and to hopefully become an ally over the years to people who need to see more representation on their campuses, because I know how important it was for me to see women in positions of leadership. Previous to this role, I served on the CSU Board of Trustees for 2 years as a student representative. And in my first year, we had 5 open presidential searches. Oh my goodness, 5 at the same time. And I was so honored and so lucky to be a part of that process. We hired 5 women presidents in that year. And that was such an empowering experience for me. Coming from the Valley, I did not know a lot of people who had college degrees or were in these professional positions. And to be in this kind of space, I hadn't really seen people who wore suits until I went to college. And so to see so many, just frankly, tough women who were so well educated, who had come from very little but made so much of what they had, it was so inspiring to me, even coming from the place of privilege that I come from, and really made me want to strive for more. So knowing how that's impacted me, even with all of my privilege, makes me so passionate about this work and really wanting to push the recommendations that the campaign has come up with. And I know I'm going on, so I'll just say one more thing. I think it's so important, as others have mentioned, seeing yourself reflected, but also your experiences, not just what you look like. I think our former foster youth often have so little representation in leadership and in our colleges in general. I think that there are so many ways that we do support our students who come from backgrounds like that, but to see yourself, to know that where you come from, you can still go to these great lengths to be a university president, to be an administrator, to wear a suit, which was something I never thought about. It might seem silly, but I walked onto a college campus and I couldn't believe it. Being in these fancy buildings, they were the fanciest buildings I had ever seen when I first stepped foot on a college campus on my first day. I had never been to a campus before. And so I think this is such good work, and there's so much good work left to do, and I'm really thankful to be a small part of it.
Thank you, Maggie. Same question for you, Dr. Lee. Your initial reactions, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So my name is Melissa Lee, and I am a Fresno native. And I came back here just roughly about 3 years ago. I left the state. So my perspective when I was reading the report was that I was kind of shocked and a little surprised to a certain extent, was that I lived in the Midwest, and so diversity in the Midwest is so drastically different than diversity in California. So when I came here for my job interview and meeting President Castro, it was a blessing to me because I saw someone who I felt like I could relate to. On other campuses that I'd worked at, I had no one that I could relate to. And so one of the main reasons I came here was having President Castro as a leader, and seeing him there made me recognize that I want to work for someone like that, because I could aspire and have someone mentor and coach me and see that as well. And I do not regret coming to Fresno State because it has been an amazing time here. Another reason I came here is that the students here reflect me. So not only did I grow up here, but I'm a first-generation student from a refugee family, and I come here, and every student that walks in the door, their stories are so similar to mine that I can relate to them. And I've realized that the power of that is that students then actually feel that they can relate to me as well. So it's not that I'm only relating to them, but they see my story as a reflection of their own stories. So as I was reading this, I was pleasantly surprised, but it also reminded me that I'm in California and that we still have a lot of work to be done, and that we are the leaders in this, and that the other states around the country are looking to us to take this big challenge that we have here and show them the way. And so I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you. Anything to add, or?
I won't.
Okay. All right. I have a few questions. This first question I want to pose to both President Castro and to you, Ms. Siqueiros. The Campaign for College Opportunities Left Out report presents obviously some alarming data about racial and gender homogeneity in the faculty and leadership in California's 3 systems of public higher ed. This report helps advance our collective understanding of the many benefits of faculty and administrative diversity may have on all students, not just students of color, as you referenced in your presentation. It's apparent that both you and President Castro each care deeply about research and staying current with a variety of scholarly publications and professional associations. As a faculty, I'm really grateful for that. I'd like to hear both of your responses to the following. One of the report's recommendations is that institutional leaders review policies to ensure more diverse hiring practices. I did a little bit of digging and disaggregated the tenure ranks. At Fresno State, as of fall 2017, 69% of the full professors, 50% of the associate professors, and 51% of all staff are white. However, only 19% of our students are white. What are some specific practices that you would recommend to help this recommendation that Fresno State students have access to a more diverse faculty and staff?
Who wants to start?
You should go, Dr.
Okay, great. Well, I think that's a great question. And I guess as president, the way I look at this issue is we are evolving as an institution. If you think about just Fresno State as an example, we became an HSI maybe 20 years ago. Victor, you probably know exactly when it happened because you were here. And even 10 years ago, we maybe had half the Latino population that we have today. And the Asian American population has increased. The first generation to college population has increased. And so from that historical perspective, you know, as a 107-year-old institution, there's been some pretty dramatic changes that have occurred over the last few decades. And when you hire a professor, if all goes well, they're going to be with us for 30 years. And so the way I look at it, I hope for us that'll be the case. Yes. We started together, and actually, Professor Hernandez and his wife, they represent that promise that we have, because every single time we get a chance to search, we have the opportunity to attract talented folks like he and his wife. And that's really, for me, what it's all about. How do we as an institution, as a system, have the policies, the procedures, the commitment to action from the leadership? And I know that I have the symbolic role of modeling that too with my cabinet and with my own staff, and encouraging and urging and pushing my colleagues to do that. I think it requires a commitment by all of us and a modeling by all of us, and starting with me. And then each and every time that we search, that we do our very best to attract a diverse pool. And I get to the point where I agree with you, Michelle, that we cannot say that it's a pool problem. On the other hand, I get to that surgical point. If we're looking for a chemist, and Dr. Sanchez is my lead on this, we know how many Latino chemists just graduated this year, or African American or Asian American. And so then the goal is to try and get those folks in our pool, and to get them to campus and to meet us and to persuade them to come here, because as you know, they have lots of options as well. And we've been able to get an overrepresentation of Latinos, for example, the last few years, if you look at the pool data versus who we've brought in. And I think that's the beginning, but certainly so much more work that has to be done. I think it combines all those strategies.
So I think both of you have talked about what I would say are the two of three very critical principles, and not that the three are it, but the fact that you have to have intention around it, right? Which is what Dr. Castro just mentioned. You have to want to make sure that your pool is more diverse, and you have to want to hire more diversity on your campus. And so I think that is important. So we have to push our leaders who maybe aren't as willing or interested in that to be intentional about it, and to demonstrate to them why it's important and why it's good for their institutions. So I think that's the first and most important piece. The second, I would say, is to really be looking at the data, right? Which Dr. Hernandez just mentioned is you have to be analyzing your own institutional data. And I would say that includes, right, what Dr. Castro said, which you look at the pool, you look at where are you outreaching, where are you advertising for the job, what are you including in the qualifications of the job? Do you require that folks prove that they can successfully teach first-generation students? Not just say that they're comfortable teaching first-generation students. So I think that those two pieces are critical. The hiring committees themselves have to reflect what the student body looks like as well, right? And I think this is where the courage comes in, right? Because Dr. Castro is limited to some extent in terms of the hires, but as Dr. George Boggs, who advised us on this paper, used to serve as the president of the American Association for Community Colleges and was a former college president, said he would send hires back. So he couldn't determine who came and was presented to him to hire for certain faculty positions, but he could review the process, determine that it had not been very inclusive, that they'd not done enough to outreach to diverse populations, and he could reject. He could say, well, of the two candidates that you're indicating I should pick from, I'm not comfortable. And so I think that requires courage, right? Because that requires battles that maybe a president doesn't want to have with his faculty or deans. And so I think that is also why we have to own the other piece, which is how do we support leadership to take much more aggressive positions on these issues if we really care about it. Because you can't just ask Dr. Castro to stick his neck out on the line if you're not going to be there to back him up when he does.
Thank you. That's a very informative answer, Michelle. Thank you so much. I'd like to frame the next question for you, Dr. Lee. In your role in the Division of Student Affairs and Enrollment Management, that role allows you to provide leadership on an institutional scale. You're a role model to students, staff, and faculty. One of the report's recommendations is for leaders to develop clear pathways to leadership and invest in leadership development opportunities for staff. How might student affairs educators at Fresno State play a role in diversifying our staff leadership? And maybe as a follow-up question, can you please tell us about some of the opportunities that are available to help diversify our staff leadership?
I think in our area, we've been having this conversation over the last year, trying to figure out in what ways can we start pulling up more staff and providing more career mobility. And those conversations are very difficult to have. And being in a unionized environment, trying to figure out a good balance there has been a little bit of a challenge. But we've talked a lot about how can we work across the board with other departments collaboratively to potentially give our staff opportunities to actually expand maybe job skills outside of their area of expertise. We have a lot of staff who are interested in doing some more counseling job duties, but their current job is not something related to counseling. And so how can we give them that opportunity to expand that skill set, gain that skill set, and potentially get that as a career job as well? And we've been focusing a lot on a lot of professional development, sending staff to conferences, sending staff to leadership development as well. What I've recognized is that a lot of our staff aren't choosing to actually participate in these activities, and what we're doing is we're actually handpicking them instead. Because I think a lot of times staff are a little more hesitant to step forward. You'll have a handful of staff who are always the first one to raise their hand to say, yes, I want to attend this, or yes, I want to go. But you'll have a lot of staff who are choosing not to stand up. And it is our prerogative, it is important for us as leaders to start going and selecting staff who we think are going to be really wonderful, but they haven't actually identified that. I see myself as falling to that same categories that I was really fortunate to have, mentors and faculty who came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, why didn't you apply for this? Why aren't you considering this? And my first thought was, well, I just didn't think I really would qualify. And I said, yes, you will. And that tapping on the shoulder is necessary. And I've realized that among my staff, that's what they need. They need somebody to say, I believe in you, and you can do this. And that is just the carrot that they need to actually do it. They are very capable. We have a wonderful staff here, but not enough folks have actually tapped them on the shoulder to say, let's try. What can I do to help you? And I think that's where the supportive environment is essential in developing leaders even among our division.
Wonderful, thank you. And I'm proud to say in our HEAL program, we have a lot of our staff members as graduate students, and so certainly our graduate education programs provide one of those pipelines for our current staff members. Before I continue to the next question, I'd like to remind the audience there's going to be a little bit of time for Q&A for you all, so start thinking about what you might want to ask, all right? The next question is for you, Ms. White. Again, thank you for your service as president of the California State Student Association. CSSA offers you a unique understanding of higher education leadership in California. Considering the findings of the Left Out report, how are your student peers reacting to the lack of faculty and administrative diversity in higher ed?
Thank you for that question. I think so many of my friends have had experiences where they had that intuition that people weren't like them in leadership roles, but they didn't realize how badly it affected them until there was that one person who tapped them on the shoulder their junior year in their comms class and said, hey, there's this conference you should apply for. There's a really good paper that you wrote. And it was for, I'm thinking of a specific friend at Stanislaus State named Maria, who's just a wonderful student and friend of mine, and is a first generation American and college student. And I think she went back and forth on majors and what she was going to do and what she wanted from the experience. But in her junior year, there was a professor who literally, I think, tapped her on the shoulder and said, you are such a standout of this course. And it was another Latina professor who really reflected her, and she was able to connect with that person went to a conference. It was probably, I think, her first time traveling for this sort of thing, presented a paper she had worked on with the professors, now planning to get her PhD. And previous to this, had no thought of doing something like that. We had many conversations together, what are we going to do after school? And that was never part of the conversation. So I think for so many students, though, they're not having that transformative experience because there just aren't enough of those people to go around tapping everyone on the shoulder when they need it. And so I think people are feeling left out, as the title of this report suggests. But I think for the students who are able to have that experience of someone taking them under their wing, they then realize how left out they were feeling before that. And so I want to suggest more of these mentorship programs, but I hesitate to do that because I know it's putting more literal and emotional labor onto these professors of color. And so that's why I hesitate to say that's the one solution, because we know that there is this pool of our very talented students of color, but I hesitate to say, well, we just need the faculty of color to take on more and more of that emotional labor of connecting with students. And so I think it's everyone's job when you're in a leadership position to make this one of your top #1 priorities, to see these students who maybe are a little more quiet, maybe sit a little further back in the room, because maybe they aren't connecting with you as they would with another professor. And so I think I would say that's everyone's responsibility. And I also think, as I mentioned earlier, having representation where you come from, the regional representation is also so important. I'm always just giving love to Dr. Castro because I really appreciate knowing that he's from the same area that I'm from, and it means so much to me, not even going here to Fresno State, but I know that students here must feel the same way, seeing someone who's really made it from your neighborhood. I think that means a lot. So all different kinds of representation are going to help our students be more successful.
Absolutely. I joke with Dr. Castro. I say he went from Hanford to Stanford, right? I think that's always worth noting. And I think your point, Maggie, touches on what Michelle was talking about in being equity-minded and not seeing students from a deficit framework, right? Instead of saying, oh, look, they're in the back and they're quiet, maybe a professor should acknowledge, what am I doing to encourage this student to really feel like they're part of this classroom environment, right? And so that a lot of that might start in that self-reflection, but you're asking people with high degrees of education to really think about improving their practice, and that can sometimes be a challenge, right? All right, I'd like to take a little bit of time now, like I do in my classes, to pause and make sure that the audience is represented here as well. So we might have some microphones that rove around. We can certainly borrow mine, but we'd like to take some audience questions and remind y'all that we are being streamed live on Facebook, so speak into the microphones, and we might have some time for preamble, but certainly do ask the question. That would be helpful for us to answer the question here. So anybody from the audience is welcome to step up and ask a question. Yes, Chelsea?
So my name is C. Thank you so much for, I have to sit down. I'm a graduate student here, so I'm so happy to come to this event. I actually saw it on Facebook, so great, Dr. Louis Mercado. Thank you for posting this on Facebook. My question is, I did hear pipeline program earlier. So as a graduate student, I'm going to be getting a master's degree. So I hear that we are producing a lot of master degree level professional. But what I want to know is, I want to be a professor, so what kind of programs or what have we been doing, and what can we do to increase student of color, especially, let's say, for example, Fresno State, we have a lot of South Asian students. What are we doing? What can we do to increase the number of students to transition from the CSU to research university to do their PhD, and encourage them to come back and be faculty here?
I can talk about my lived experience having done that, right? And like I said, I have 4 degrees on my wall, and I'm proud of that AA, but if it wasn't for the Cal State and the education I received at Cal State Long Beach, I would not be here, right? And it took individual actors, right? I was not a superstar student, I'll admit that, right? I got a 2.9 GPA, so a lot of those cutoffs at 3.0, I was not a McNair. I did not qualify for Sally Casanova pre-doctoral fellowship. So some of those things I could not take advantage of. But those programs are out there, right? The Chancellor's Doctoral Incentive Program to really offer forgivable loans for folks to come back and work at the Cal State system. I will share that and just say that there is still hope, you know, for those of us that, for me in particular, that was that 2.9 student right under the cutoff. And I'm grateful that my master's program still accepted me. And that I'm here at Fresno State, and that's my personal commitment, right? Like, I had options to go to other universities, but working at Cal State, at Fresno State in particular, allowed me to live out my values, right? And to say, I'm gonna work with the students that some people only write about and only see as data points. Like, I work with them, I talk with them, I learn with them, I struggle with them. And it's an immense pleasure of mine to be back at a Cal State. And so I encourage you to consider, you know, like you said, a research university at another, if you are not place bound or if you are mobile, right? And then never forget where you came from and then apply for a job back here. But I don't know if there's other, you know, systemic things that you might want to talk about, Dr. Castro?
Sure. Well, I'm right on with you. I think that, as was discussed earlier today, we have the opportunity as a CSU or the UC system producing so many talented men and women of color at the bachelor's and master's level that we have the opportunity to develop partnerships with other institutions that provide the doctorate and could then possibly have that student come back home to be a faculty member. We're starting to see some of that happen now at Fresno State, and I would love to see more of it. And there have been a number of institutions like UCSF and Health Sciences. The Dean of the Hastings Law School came to see me, where they want to build aggressive partnerships with us because they see the talent that we have here, and the diversity. And so I think there's an opportunity over the next few years for us to be much more intentional about those partnerships, and then that gives students like you who are going to get your, you know, bachelor's and master's here with that, you know, option to get into some programs with these other institutions. And then strategically, if you're interested, to then come back home and be on the faculty, because I would love to see more of that happening. And I think we have the opportunity to do that.
Anyone else, anything else to add to that? No? I will also say, you can make a difference in professional advocacy associations, much like the Campaign for College Opportunity and a variety of other groups in California that still allow you to be a change agent and not necessarily only as a tenure track professor. Another question from the audience. Yes, Ricardo, one of my HEAL alum.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everybody. It is very important to share this information with education leaders and academic leaders, but what is the Campaign for College Opportunity or Fresno State or U.S. individuals doing to share this information with either undergraduates or high school students to say, you know what, we need you in the education leadership campaign or in the education leadership room or whatever. What are y'all doing to share that information with them? Because a lot of times, you know, we are pushing STEM, and that's great, but what are we doing to push this on our high school students, on our community college students, on our undergraduate students?
That's a really tough question. I think our focus has really been to focus on pressuring state leaders and institutional leaders to change their practices. We do work with student organizations and mostly at the campus level, campus leaders, so that they can also be a voice and share their experience and their story and push for it. Unfortunately, we don't have the capacity to really be working directly with high school students. But one of the things we have constantly pushed is school districts themselves, right, around addressing inequities that may exist in their own school districts around preparing students for college, getting them A through G eligible, encouraging them to fill out the FAFSA. But maybe Maggie can speak a little bit more to other, engagement opportunities of student leaders, because we certainly need and want their voices.
Thank you, and I think that's a great question, not just for affecting leadership and faculty today, but again, creating that pipeline of leaders who are aware from a young age of the work that needs to be done and want to be a part of it. So the board of directors for my organization, Cssa, is made up of the student body presidents of the 23 CSU campuses. And I'm very proud. I think this is probably the most diverse board that we have ever had, to my knowledge, which means that there is that student leadership, at least on the campuses, that is diverse and aware and appreciative of diversion and inclusivity. And something we've shared this report with them already. We look forward to discussing it with them further. But one thing that is very concrete that we do is that when there is a presidential search or a provost search or something similar to that on the campus, I believe it's common practice, or at least best practice in the CSU, to include the student body president or their representative in the search process. Yes. And so having a student body president who cares about these issues, I can tell you every single one in the CSU does, they are going to at least bring one voice to the process, not knowing who else is on these searches and looking at the numbers and the breakdown in our leadership. We can tell it might not be the most diverse group or a group that is particularly naturally focused on that issue. So at least having a student representative in that process who cares about this is going to be bringing up, well, this person doesn't seem to have done a lot of work with students who look like ours or represent where we come from, or what's their track record of working with this population. I think at least having that one voice in the room is really important, and I'm glad that we at CSSA can be a part of encouraging that and sharing information like this, that they're very aware of the current statistics.
I just want to add on all of our searches for the cabinet level positions, and I think many of the other positions, it's required to have a student leader on there. So that's a very helpful thing. Just if I could just say quickly, I think the other important way that we address your question is to be out there early with our young people and say to them that we believe in them, that talent exists in every household, regardless of income and regardless of whether there's been an adult who's gone on to college, but that they can do it. And how do we help them? How do we support them? And I think that's so important, because then they can imagine to be a professor here, or a president, or whatever position, head of a campaign for college opportunity, those kinds of things. And I think it requires us to be there with them and to help them imagine that early on. And I know that our team under Dr. Lee is doing a lot of that work in the community, and we need to do more of it with the West Hills, the other community colleges, and with the K-12.
Yeah, Ricardo, and I think you're uniquely positioned as in your role with the TRIO programs, right? And your target population is very receptive to that, and I encourage you to share this report with your students. It would be fun reading for them. I think we have time for one more question, and I saw one hand in here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Maybe I should stand back here. My name is Gina Liu Gong, and I'm a lecturer here in Fresno State in Asian American Studies in the Department of Anthropology, but I'm also a graduate student in the CODEL program, which is the online Doctorate in Educational Leadership. Yay! So I have not necessarily, well, it maybe is a question, but kind of a challenge maybe to ask of you. So when you mentioned, Michelle, that there's a bright spot, and you mentioned that Asian students are kind of on par with the faculty, of which I guess I'm one, although non-tenured faculty, it kind of also brought to mind this whole image of model minority, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And I think that's a problem when we're dealing with the Asian American, Native, Hawaiian, Pacific Islander population, because there's just so many different groups that are included in that category, and they really don't have anything to do with one another. And it also masks the fact that Asian Americans, Southeast Asians, Pacific Islanders are not all doing equally well, especially here at this campus. I'm sorry to say this, but Asian Americans are have one of the lowest graduation rates here. And it has a lot to do with the fact that we have a large first-generation refugee population, right? So that's kind of understood, but the fact that they do have this low graduation rate is masked because people think that Asians are doing well, because they're included in this whole AANHPI population. So maybe my question is, how do we move beyond this? How do we actually promote the idea that all campuses need to disaggregate their data, that we need to collect disaggregated data and analyze disaggregated data so that we could have more meaningful interventions, more meaningful programs and practices on all our campuses?
Thank you so much for that question, because I absolutely agree with you. About a year and a half ago, we released a State of Higher Education report for Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders that did disaggregate by ethnicity to address all the challenges that you've already so eloquently stated, which is that, you do have to look at all of the different groups to really see that there's a huge difference and range of experience, both in terms of college readiness, college going, and graduation rates. And so it is critical. We have supported legislation statewide, which has continued to be vetoed by Governor Brown, that would require disaggregation for Asian American populations. And so if that continues to not be supported by this governor, we certainly would demand that the next governor allow that kind of information gathering. There's very much inconsistent data collection across our campuses, as you're well aware. So one of our big priorities, again, for the next governor is to ensure a much stronger data infrastructure and to push the governor to make commitments around closing gaps by race and ethnicity. So without, again, that intentionality and the data to inform it, then obviously we're not going to get very far. I do want to give a few caveats around the research, right? We are limited in the fact that we can't analyze income status. So Maggie, and I were having a conversation about President Nelson because we had an event yesterday at Sac State. And I think that there's something incredibly powerful about also talking about income, right? And that affects, poor white students, especially in this region. Their challenge in feeling like they belong on campus is a very real issue that we have to address. So obviously the report doesn't analyze, income inequality and all of the repercussions of that. The second piece, I don't want to give the impression that we are doing well for Asian Americans. In fact, when I did the UC presentation, I really talked about how the whole pipeline argument really falls apart because the UC has 39% of their students are Asian American. But when you look at UC leadership and UC faculty, there's not adequate Asian American representation. Now, anybody that wants to argue pipeline would say, well, how can you justify that? We're clearly producing, not enough, but certainly a large number of Asian Americans with degrees in this state. And so I think it highlights the importance of intentionality around inclusion, around race and ethnicity, that can't just be explained away by some of these arguments. The final caveat I'll add is around African Americans. So if you glance at the report, you may say, well, African Americans are fairly well represented among senior leadership positions. And so we do have a section where we go deeper into this because we believe that that's actually inadequate. When you look at African American population in our state, in terms of who are college goers, we should probably have double the amount of African Americans on our campuses. And so if you do have leadership that, the student population may be between 4 to 6%, depending on which system of student enrollment, and maybe you have senior leaders that are about double that percentage, well, that's actually maybe equitable representation if you're thinking about the student population or the universe outside your campus, right, in terms of who should be enrolled. So I share those caveats because they're important. It's difficult to convey all of the amazing, data and research that we pulled out, but I think it is important to think thoughtfully for every community. So there is a section for Latinos, there's a section on African Americans and Asian Americans and whites. And then there's also very real limitations around data infrastructure in our state. I don't think it should be the responsibility of the campaign to continue to collect and analyze this data. I think this is something that we should demand that our policymakers expect and that our institutions provide.
Can I add to that? And it's also just an example to the people that were asking a question about that, and also the
leadership of our president. A few years ago, the Latino faculty staff, which I'm the president of, and along with the California Latino leadership, began to look at our own data. So we've been data mining for a while. What we did was looked at the ethnic distribution of the campus and also by college. We have 8 colleges. Then we went back and looked at the faculty distribution, of course, teasing out and pulling out non-tenure track and those types of things. And you find these large disparities. And now we're going to go back and overlay the dropout rate per college. And part of our solution is recommending that faculty, our own campus experts, look at that. Because it's a great retention tool. The one thing I didn't see on the report is, yeah, we got to get them in. How do we keep them? We have faculty leave all the time. They don't, but this leadership has been a lot different, and they run to the problem. So they've been very supportive, and Lynette's been very supportive as well. But you have to take it upon yourself. I mean, luckily myself and Martine, my colleague, are nerds, so we like looking at data. And it doesn't bore us. It excites us, right? But it's also an educational piece for non-ethnic faculty and staff. And our job in this room, everyone's job, is to find the research that really does clarify and clear up the relationship between retention and these faculty and staff in leadership positions. Because the bottom line is the retention factor. We've done a great job, but I always believe, like Dr. Castro believes, we can do much better. But this is not his work alone. We're pulling him out here and there and doing all kinds of things. He needs our expertise and everyone's expertise here to do his job. But I would ask you to go back and look at that relationship to retention. Also, look at different areas like the auxiliary areas. Look at the student affairs areas and see where there's places of improvement, because they're critical players. Faculty in themselves cannot do this alone, right? So you have to have a very comprehensive approach. So thank you for your work, but also thank you, Dr. Castro. But of course, to the audience here, you just have to dig down and do the work. The data's there. Just dig it and then have a template and have a concept you want to try to achieve. Thank you.
And may I just very, very briefly add, so I thought the question about the disaggregation of data is so important. And I think just one thing to add is that there's also work that can be done around supporting groups, not just of Southeast Asian students, so that's important, but supporting refugee students, immigrant students, and the children of those populations. I think that there's a lot more that we can do in the CSU system. So it might not be that you have a faculty member today who has the same story or comes from the same place as you. I hope that every student does, or does soon. But in the meantime, what can other leaders do to support those students holistically? Is it connecting them with a group on campus? Is it something that seems so silly as a club that would make them feel more at home on the campus? I think there are small things that can be done. I use that word pipeline. I know it's not the correct thing. But while we figure out what's needed to get more people into leadership positions that are reflective of our changing population, as we're seeing in the Valley of a growing number of Asian Americans here, I think there's work that every staff member can do at any level. You don't have to be a VP of anything to connect those students to groups on campus that are going to make them feel more at home and help them be more successful.
Thank you for that. And with that, I'd like to close the panel, and I believe we're going to have some closing remarks. But I would like to say thank you to each of our panelists and the audience. Your questions were very insightful. Your responses were very insightful. It was my pleasure of serving on this panel with you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Linda Vasquez, and I have the honor of being a part of the campaign team, working under Michelle and Audrey Dow, our Senior Vice President, who couldn't make it today. Thank you to our esteemed panelists, President Castro for hosting us, Maggie for making the trip down here, and Dr. Lee for coming. I know you just had a baby and for making the time to come here. So again, another round of applause for our panelists. I am very proud, and I always like to say this to anyone who's willing to hear it, I'm a very proud CSU alumni. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton, and I even like to say this publicly, I'm more proud to be an alumna of Cal State Fullerton than I am of my master's campus, which is in Columbia. It's a pretty good campus. It's Columbia University. I went there for my master's, but Fullerton did everything for me. The CSU did everything. to help me succeed. Growing up as a first-gen student, I was born in Mexico. I come from an immigrant family. All of my siblings, except 2 of them, were born in Mexico. And for us, it was always the expectation that you were going to go to college. I remember growing up that my mom, yeah, she would make me do chores, but first and foremost, it was always go do your homework and read your books. I blame her now because I don't know how to make some excellent Mexican dishes because she had me reading most of the time, but the expectation was always to study and always to go to school. And I knew that that was going to be my future, to go to college, and I went to Cal State Fullerton, that was my local campus. But it wasn't until I got to Cal State Fullerton that I even started to think about what was next. What do I actually want to do when I go to college? Do I want to pursue grad school? And I saw myself in a lot of the faculty members at Cal State Fullerton. Their names are Alejandro Gradilla, Patricia Perez, and even my own Professor Sullivan, Dr. Rafe Sonnenschein, who's now at the Pat Brown Institute at Cal State LA. All of them, regardless of the color of their skin, played a role in ensuring that I was successful and that I saw myself in them and being a leader in education. And I hope you all found today's conversation to be thought-provoking, because I know that we often talk about diversity, but it can be an uncomfortable conversation to have at times. And today, today's data and the data that's reflected in our left out report is quite heavy. I mean, today we only dove into the CSU level data, but as Michelle mentioned, we were at UC Riverside a few weeks ago to go into this UC level data. We were at East Los Angeles College to go over the community college level data because we wanted to talk about it by segments. And although this report provides us I think a pretty comprehensive picture of what leadership looks like at our entire system level here in California. The truth is that people have been talking about this for a very long time. Many of you in this room have been talking about it for a long time. And we have change makers, we have leaders, we have advocates, scholars that have long called attention to these disparities in higher ed, whether that's been about access, student success, or representation and leadership. These scholars have published extensively about college opportunity, equity, and student success. The truth tellers have shown a light on some of the most critical issues in higher ed, issues that, again, sometimes might be controversial. They are beacons of light, trailblazers who brighten the path to equity in California. These voices have given ammunition to others, including organizations like the Campaign for College Opportunity, to fight against some of the most pressing issues in higher education. And that's why we're so proud to honor 4 people, 4 exemplary leaders, scholars, and researchers in California who've led the way and paved the way in shining light on some of these issues about diversity, race, and equity in higher ed. And in your programs, you have a list of those speakers. Here, we unfortunately couldn't, one of the last scholars, Sean Harper, couldn't join us today, but throughout our series, we've recognized each of these leaders, and we'll be able to share this information about the award and why we honored them on our website, so it'll be a chance for you to continue the conversation post, Fresno event. But we want to continue doing this work because at the campaign we release research reports, and it's not just for the fun of producing data, although Abby might find it very fun to do. We want to continue the conversation, and these researchers help us uplift those critical issues. And again, on behalf of the Campaign for College Opportunity and our amazing co-host, Cal State University Fresno, we want to thank you for being here. Yesterday when we flew in, which was a very bumpy, scary ride, didn't think we were going to land. The sun is shining here today, and I think that's very telling for the conversation we're having because there are many bright spots and opportunities to do better. Michelle talked about diversity and also inclusion, and she likes to talk about how inclusivity and inclusion can be a verb. We often see diversity statements in institutional websites and brochures, handouts. You see it everywhere of how institutions or organizations value and appreciate diversity, but oftentimes there's not enough gumption in there, or there's not enough action to actually do something about it. So I want to impart on you that inclusivity and being inclusive can actually be a verb. Inclusion and diversity are not synonymous. We must go beyond having good intentions, drawing lines in the sand about diversity. We must take action now. Failure to do so means that students will not have those crucial mentors who can guide them through the challenges and opportunities in higher education. As one Cal State Long Beach student told us, What's wrong with us that there aren't more of us in leadership positions? Because what I see on a daily basis sends a message to me that these other people are more qualified than someone like me. The stakes aren't high just for students. We talked about current staff members on campus. We talked about faculty members and rise to top leadership positions. An absence of diversity in positions of power have a chilling effect on the aspirations of potential leaders who see little room for people like themselves in top levels of leadership. The future is bright for California, but only if we are intentional in our efforts. Do we want to instill a sense of belonging or perpetuate a devastating sense of exclusion? I think we can all agree in the former. And I have to say that Dr. Lee's comment about having, you said it was just so powerful, the students, having students that reflect me. This is sort of like a change of thinking, how we always like to say, hey, let's prepare students to be more college ready. How about institutions see themselves as being more student ready? This is a way for institutions to see themselves more as being more student ready, that leaders can also see themselves in students. Paul Granillo, president and a CEO of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership and one of our own board members, said, "The Left Out report is not just about demographics. It's about helping our college leaders, our governor, and our system leaders understand that diversity in our faculty, academic senates, and in our campus leadership is directly tied to student success. And if we don't act on that, then we are letting out our students and our future economy." If there's one thing I want to impart on you today is that this isn't a problem with no solutions. In our recommendations, we don't list a timeline for achieving these goals, because we are serving students today and every day. What we do now and what we must do now will impact students tomorrow. With the right leadership, this can be done. Higher education's moment is now. And I'd like to invite you to continue joining the conversation with us. This executive summary that you see here is actually just a snapshot of the full report that is over 140 pages long. You talked about you can bring this to students. We actually have many extra copies that if you'd like to take to your classes, use this as a lecture opportunity for your students. Take these copies to your own organizations and have a conversation with your own team members. I encourage you to go to our website and find a toolkit that was developed in partnership with the Center for Urban Education under Dr. Estela Bensemon's leadership. We talked a lot about the data and also the how-to. That toolkit is a guide for how you can do this in your own institutions and your own organizations. And again, thank you for being here today.